Now, getting back though to the subject of ERVs, one of the top, if not a very top tier evidence for the evolution worldview, and another supposed piece of evidence that is, like I said, it's going to bite the dust. Kent, you're going to have to throw that song in the edit. Another one is going to bite the dust here. I've got two awesome guests for this conversation. You're probably going to remember them from a couple months ago as we touched on genetics versus evolution. They are number one, Donny Budinsky, a researcher who has spent years, I think he has eaten, slept, breathed, just done all kinds of stuff on endogenous retroviruses. He's here to shatter that evolutionary narrative, break down the real function of ERVs, and show you what they're really doing, along with his cohort, Matt Naylor. I think I'm going to call him the Kung Fu Creationist, okay? He loves research so much. He does it full time as he works with Donny and their ministry, Standing for Truth. You're going to love them both. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Donny and Matt. Donny and Matt, thanks for hanging out with me today, guys.
Eric, as always, it is a privilege to be here with you today. I think you nailed it, brother. Another one bites the dust, and we are going to prove that for you and your audience here this afternoon.
Matt and Donny, I don't mean to put too much pressure on you, but I got to tell you, I got a guy that calls me on the regular. He's been on my show before right here in studio. In my context, he's called Atheist Bill. And he says he's an atheist, but he's a very honest guy. He's like, oh, atheists can't explain that. Oh, atheists got a problem with that. So I really love conversations with him because he's not trying to sugarcoat something and create a narrative. He told me, and Matt, you got to help me out with this. Donny, you got to help me with this. He said endogenous retroviruses are his last holdout for evolution being true and creation being wrong. He said that's the only thing keeping me from coming to Christ. And so in one sense, I want to try to say, guys, I got a lot riding on this. I'm going to send this show to Bill and say, hey, Bill, what do you think? So no pressure, but a lot riding on this conversation, guys. Can you handle that kind of pressure?
Of course we can. This is what we do. This is the fun part.
We work well under pressure, yes.
I love it. And the good news is I know ultimately, and I've told Bill this, man, no amount of evidence is going to convert you. It's only the Holy Spirit that can open your eyes. But I pray that this conversation will open his eyes, along with other evolutionists that are out there that really are seeing this as a top tier evidence for evolution. Okay, I got about 24 minutes to go here with social media. So, Donny, can you kick us off on, ERVs and give us kind of an overview of what they are, and then let's get into this debunking right away so we can see exactly what they are and how they're actually evidence for creation, not for evolution, and how people have been lied to. Is it okay to just jump right in with that, guys?
Absolutely, brother. Let's do it. Let's leave no stone unturned today on the topic of ERVs, endogenous retroviruses.
And by the way, you wrote a book on, I was going to say, there's the book. Okay. You got to get his book on this. If you want more information, go to Standing for Truth Ministries website, which is standingfortruthministry.com.org.
Standingfortruthministries.com. Yes.
Standingfortruthministries.com. Go there and you can click the link right there. They got a whole section just on ERVs, endogenous retroviruses. You're really going to get educated on this, as it is a top tier argument for evolution, or evidence, they say, for evolution. So jump in and show us what's really going on.
Okay, brother, let's set the foundation a little bit as Matt and I tackle the main questions and the biggest points surrounding this issue of ERVs. And so, as you pointed out, Eric, and I appreciate it, you can find my book, The Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook. You can grab a copy from Amazon. It is available now, but you can access it through the website, standingfortruthministries.com. Now, why is this topic important? Well, Eric laid it out nicely. As many in the evolutionary camp, they view endogenous retroviruses, shared endogenous retroviral-like sequences in the biological world, as the single best piece of evidence for common descent. And so as biblical creationists, it is important that we address their best challenges. And so that is exactly why this is an important topic. Now let's make ERVs fun again. It is a technical topic, Eric, And I don't know how much fun ERVs were in the past, but we are going to do our best here this afternoon to make ERVs as fun as we can. And I'm excited for this. So here's
I'll
the
be the
important.
idiot that asks clarifying questions when I don't understand what you're saying. So,
Of course. That's what I'm here for, clarifying questions and keeping this comprehensive for the audience. And so I want people to think on this question throughout today's program. It is an important question. I'll bring it up several times, and Matt will also help and assist us in answering it. Are endogenous retroviruses really the ancient remnants of past viral infections? Eric, you started off in your introduction pointing out that the evolutionary community sees ERV sequences as fossil viruses. So the question is, are they really fossil viruses, or are they created units of DNA function? Both positions have very different expectations and predictions. We, as a biblical creationist, we would expect design, purpose, and function associated with these ERVs. The evolutionary community would expect largely junk. Now, here are several important questions that Matt and I are going to answer very thoroughly in this program. Why are ERV-like sequences shared between the genomes of organisms? Sneak preview or teaser, it is common design. We are going to get to the reasons why. You'll see this question is like asking, why do all types of modes of transportation have engines in common? Well, engines are important. Without an engine in your car, Eric, you're probably not going to get very far. You're not going to be able to use the car for what it was designed to be used
I'm going to
for.
be Fred Flintstoning it, no doubt
That's
about
right.
it.
That's right. So the second question, if viral-like sequences in the genomes of organisms are functional, which we are going to demonstrate directly from the conventional literature, we're going to refute shared endogenous retroviral-like sequences directly from the secular literature itself. As we go through today's program, you're going to find that ERVs are functional in embryological development. They're functional in determining cell types, gene regulation, gene expression. They act as antiviral protectors. I'm excited for you guys to see this directly from the conventional literature. The next question we will be addressing is, why do they bear similarity to viral genetic material? Why do ERVs look like exogenous retroviruses, which we'll get into more here in the next couple slides. The third question, which Matt is going to primarily address here today, what is the best explanation for the nested hierarchical distribution of endogenous retroviral-like sequences in primate genomes? What that means is, okay, we have ERV sequences and we share more of them with the chimpanzee than we do with a gorilla or an orangutan or a dog. And so there's this natural nested hierarchy. And we're going to see that that hierarchy is there due to design as we move forward today. And the last question, the most important question, can the separate ancestry model better explain the data than common descent? And teaser, yes, it can. Let's go over the details. Help us understand exactly what we are dealing with here today. According to the standard evolutionary story of endogenous retroviruses, an ERV is a stretch of DNA found in your DNA that got there when one of your ancestors was infected by a retrovirus. So that's the story. That's the evolutionary story as to how we got these ERV sequences, that ancestors in the distant past, millions of years ago, were infected by harmful retroviruses, and they were infected in the right way, in the right spot, to be passed down to future generations. That's why they call them, as you can see here on this slide, fossil viruses. Directly from their own literature, that's what they call them. As you can see here, these ERVs as they are called in technical terms, represent
ERVs.
footprints of previous retroviral infection and have been termed fossil viruses. But are they really? They also acknowledge in the conventional literature, Eric, that these infections would have occurred millions of years ago. So for the most part, they're not really observing them occur today. They're inferring it from the distant past.
So okay, you're about to show this. Okay, yeah. So they're basically saying somewhere way back when, in the book of life of a chimp, in the DNA data of a chimp, it got a virus, and that virus has been passed down chimp to chimp to chimp to chimp, all the way along to as we eventually evolved into human. And we still have them today, and they still have them, which shows that we came from each other, or we evolved from a chimp.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying would be going back millions of years ago. You have humans and chimpanzees today. Those are extant organisms. They would share a common ancestor. So they would put our common ancestor, humans and chimpanzees, back about 6 million years ago. And so that common ancestor would have been hit or infected, Eric, with exogenous retroviruses. So this is why this visual is important, because there's a difference between exogenous retrovirus and endogenous. Endogenous means that it's occurring from within. So you start off your life with endogenous retroviral-like sequences in your body already. So they occur from within. Exogenous means that they occur from outside. And so a famous or a well-known exogenous retrovirus would be HIV. And so that is transmitted horizontally. It's not going to be passed down through the germ cell line, a sperm or egg cell. So that's why there's a difference between horizontal transmission, as you can see here at the top, and vertical transmission. So in order to get an ERV, that common ancestor between humans and chimps, they would have had to be infected with an exogenous retrovirus, horizontally, externally, but that retrovirus would have had to infect a germ cell line, a reproductive cell, in order to be passed down vertically, where all progeny will have that viral sequence. And that's why they look to shared ERVs as evidence for common descent, because they say, okay, we share this many with the chimpanzee. So humans have this many ERVs. Chimpanzees have ERVs in the same genetic locations. Therefore, we must have inherited them from a past common ancestor. And after the split, we can see them in their respective locations, essentially.
So we still have them because our common ancestor had them.
Right, right.
Okay.
So our common ancestor got the infections and they were passed down to both lineages. So here on the slide, we have, surprisingly, 45% of our genomes are made up of what's called transposable elements. Okay. And again, I'll give a sneak preview. All of these DNA elements, these incredibly designed DNA elements here, have known functions, essential functions. We're specifically focusing on ERVs today, though. And so ERVs are a specific element called a retro element. But even more specific, they are an LTR. So LTR stands for long terminal repeat. That is an aspect or component of the ERV. We're going to get into that in the next slide. And so ERVs technically make up about 8% of the genome. And so the argument advances, the evolutionists will say, well, why would God create human beings with genomes littered with viral DNA? Viral fossils. So here are the different types of transposable elements: signs, lines, retrotransposons, various classes of retrotransposons, but ERVs. So that last one there, endogenous retroviruses, this is what we're primarily focusing on here. And so here's the structure. This is an important point in terms of the details. Then we're really going to hammer this one home and show why what Eric said is true. Another one bites the dust. And so here we've got LTRs on either side. This is the structure of the ERV. It's also important to point out that a retrovirus in general, Eric, They're a special type of virus that have specifically an RNA genome. So their genetic material is RNA, and what they can do is convert that into DNA. This is called reverse transcription. So see that as transcription in reverse, right? Normally you got DNA to RNA to protein, but DNA transcribed into RNA translated into a protein. A retrovirus, to get its DNA integrated into a host genome, they have to perform what's called reverse transcription. So that's their RNA into DNA. And they do that through an important enzyme that's coded here in the ERV. So in between your LTRs, you've got GAG, Pro, Pol, and ENV. So ENV is your envelope protein, and your GAG and Pol genes, those are what encode, specifically your Pol gene encodes for enzymes like reverse transcriptase, which allows for this really cool mechanism of reverse transcription, protease and integrase. And so basically your retrovirus needs all of those enzymes in order to do their job, in order to infiltrate and integrate into a host genome. Here's another question I want the audience to consider as we move forward. We are going to be wrapping up the program, Matt and I, with what's called the superior model. So here's a question I want you all to consider, and I'm not going to necessarily answer it just yet. Okay. The evolutionary community really struggles with the origin of retroviruses because a retrovirus requires a host, Eric, to replicate. So the question is, it's a paradox for the evolutionists, what came first, the retrovirus or the host? If a retrovirus requires a host to replicate, then wouldn't the host have to come first? Wouldn't the host or cells have to predate retroviruses? And we'll get...
That sounds accurate, yes.
So we're going to get into why that's important a little bit later. So in a nutshell, all of these technical details, what you have here in terms of the structure of the ERV, we have ERVs sharing sequence similarity to retroviruses. So retroviruses and ERVs, as in full ERVs, which are called a provirus, they are made up of the same components, LTRs on either side, GAG, Pro, Pol, and ENV. So the argument continues from the evolutionists to say, well, why do ERVs, let's say if they're created units of DNA function, why do they look like retroviruses? That's a good question, and we'll answer it. How does viral DNA become endogenous? So here's some important details, summing up predominantly what I've discussed so far. A retrovirus uses host DNA to integrate itself after converting their RNA genome into DNA. That's the reverse transcription I was describing. And the way they can do that is through a cool enzyme called reverse transcriptase. And they utilize the cell's machinery to replicate. This is because retroviruses lack the ability to replicate themselves. This process leaves a copy of the retrovirus insertion in the DNA of the infected cell. Then if the infected cell is germline, right, you got that difference between horizontal transmission and vertical transmission, and the retroviral DNA is passed on vertically, every copy of the descendant's DNA will have this viral DNA. So I
got Gary on the chat saying, I'm going to flunk this quiz. When we do the quiz, he's going to flunk, man. It's like, there's a lot of technical stuff here. And is it really important that we understand this, or are you just trying to communicate it to say, hey, I know, like, how much do we need to go back and rewind and listen until we understand that in order to get what you're about to say about they really have function?
I would say it's very important because in order to adequately refute ERVs, we want to understand what the other side, what the evolutionary community are saying, why they believe ERVs are such a good line of evidence for common descent. We want to understand where they're coming from. And so in a nutshell, and I promise you're going to do great on the quiz, in a nutshell, why do we share ERVs with basically all creatures in the biological world? And why do they look like retroviruses? If they didn't come from retroviruses, why do they look like retroviruses? So those are the two main questions I want you to focus on. And
hang on. You're going to get to the point where you say the name endogenous retrovirus is a bad name.
Right.
Holy smokes.
So
No, like that's huge. Like that's where you're like what you're if they're used for what you're saying here, tumor suppression, acting as like they have a function. They're
right.
like the naming of the virus or the naming of it as endogenous retrovirus is the whole problem because they're seeing it as that rather than seeing it as a design by God.
You nailed it. The ERV
Holy,
did not
okay, keep
name
going. This
itself
is
ERV.
wow, this is good.
I've been pointing that out for years. Unfortunately, the evolutionary community, they named the ERV an ERV before we could. So the ERV did not name itself ERV. And you're going to notice, just like on these fancy, sophisticated computers that we do these important programs over, we have built-in antiviral programs. Well, it
Yep.
turns out that these ERV sequences are exactly that, but for the genomes of biological organisms, that they act as antiviral programs where they actually work and function to fight off invading harmful viruses, including exogenous retroviruses. And in order for them to carry out those roles, Eric, which we're going to get into a fascinating paper that essentially debunks ERVs, and the authors didn't even realize it. So the ERV has to look like the retrovirus in order to carry out a number of these functions. And so here's a
Holy
few of the
smokes.
functions. It's a great time to be a biblical creationist, Eric.